For nearly 200 years, the world's largest hummingbird was hiding a second bird inside it. Same size, almost the same feathers. Two completely different species that nobody on Earth could tell apart. You're going to find out why this bird was already breaking the rules of its own family before anyone knew there were two of them. You will follow the most extreme migration ever tracked in a hummingbird. You will see how its body copies the exact tactics of human mountaineers. And you will meet a species that turned out to be the biggest hummingbird on the planet, hiding in plain sight. Picture a hummingbird at a feeder, wings a blur, small enough to sit in your palm. Now picture one twice the size of any hummingbird you have ever seen, and you are close to this one. There are 363 known hummingbird species. Almost all of them are specialists, locked into a narrow band of temperature and altitude. Around 9 out of 10 live inside climate limits, so tight that a few hundred meters up or down a mountain would finish them. The giant hummingbird ignored all of that. Before this study, it held the widest climate range of every single one of those 363 species. Here is the question that quietly bothered the people who study these birds. How does one animal survive conditions that break every other member of its family? In 1834, a young naturalist stood on the coast of Chile and watched these birds arrive. He wrote that they came in spring from the parched deserts of the north. His name was Charles Darwin, and he had no idea he was looking at two different animals. Darwin could describe the arrival. He could not follow the departure. Where those birds went when they vanished from the coast stayed unknown for almost 2 centuries for one stubborn reason. Nothing existed that was light enough to strap onto an animal this small. A tracker heavy enough to be useful would simply ground the bird carrying it, so the route stayed a blank space on the map until miniature tags finally shrank far enough. 8 birds were fitted with tiny satellite and light tags in Chile. What came back was not a short hop along the coastline. It was a loop that ran the length of the Andes and back. These birds covered over 5,000 kilometers on the round trip, and some of them passed 8,000. That is an animal weighing about as much as a few coins flying the distance from Madrid to New York and home again. Roughly 17 to 31 grams, around double the next largest hummingbird alive. The route crossed Argentina, Bolivia, and Peru. The birds reached northern Peru between May and July and stayed there through the non-breeding month. The trip home took about 30 days straight across the Atacama Desert, timed to the flowering of columnar cactus along the way. But distance was never the hard part. Somewhere inside that loop, these birds climb more than 4,100 meters. They start at the sea and end up higher than most people ever stand without an oxygen tank. Think about what thin air actually does to you. At 4,000 meters, every breath carries roughly a third less oxygen than the one you are taking right now. Your head pounds. Your legs stop answering. So here is the second idea worth naming: staged acclimatization. It means climbing in bursts and then stopping to let your blood catch up before you climb again. Every serious mountaineer does it, and so does this hummingbird. The tags showed it clearly. The birds did not rocket up the mountain in one push. They gained altitude in jumps, then part for several days at middle elevations, then went up again. An expedition team on a high peak follows exactly the same staircase for exactly the same reason. And their blood changed the way a climber's blood changes. The protein that carries oxygen rose by nearly 3 grams in every deciliter. The share of red cells jumped just over 7 percentage points, which pushed them past the profile of birds that never leave the high mountains at all. Overshooting like that may not be a bonus. It could be the price of a life spent moving between 2 worlds instead of settling into one. Which raises something stranger. Why would a bird pay that price at all? Here is where the common assumption breaks down. We tend to picture migration as an escape from cold. Fly south, get warm, survive winter. This bird was doing the opposite and leaving a mild coast to climb into freezing thin air on purpose. The reward is food. High Andean slopes erupt with flowers on a schedule. A coastal bird can exploit if it can get up there and survive the arrival. The climb is the toll you pay for a table nobody else can reach. And this is where something stopped adding up. The giant hummingbird carries a version of that oxygen protein found nowhere else in the family except in species that never come down from extreme altitude. The birds nesting at sea level in Chile carry it too. A bird raising chicks on a warm coastline was walking around with high mountain equipment written into its genes. Nobody had a clean explanation for that, and the deeper problem was still sitting there untouched. How does one species stretch across the widest climate range in its entire family when 9 out of 10 of its relatives cannot handle a change in altitude at all? Either this bird was a freak of nature, or the question itself was built wrong. If stories like this pull you in, real science quietly rewriting something everyone assumed was settled, hit subscribe. We find a new one every week. So what happens when you stop watching a bird and start reading it? A feather, a drop of blood, a drawer of museum skins collected across a century and a half. Push all of that through a modern genome reader and the bird starts telling a very different story than its plumage does. Whole genomes from 36 individuals, genetic data from 101 birds in total. The expectation was one variable species stretched thin across a continent. That is not what came out. There were two separate lineages that stopped breeding with each other an enormously long time ago. One a stay-at-home northern bird living year-round between 1,800 and 4,300 meters in the Andes. One a southern traveler that nests at sea level and makes that brutal climb every single year. That has a name. Cryptic speciation. Two species that are genetically distinct and effectively impossible to separate by eye. It is the biological version of two strangers with identical faces walking past each other for 200 years. They split somewhere between 2.1 and 3.4 million years ago. That timing lines up with the great uplift of the central Andean high plateau. The mountains rose and the population caught above the clouds never came back down. You might be thinking that if they look almost identical, how could anyone be sure these are really two different species? Fair. Looks are exactly what fooled everyone for 2 centuries. The answer is in who they breed with. The genetic separation between the two is close to total, which only happens after an immense stretch of time with almost no mixing. Among 101 sampled birds, exactly one clear hybrid turned up, and these two share the same ground for part of every year. Which leaves one more idea to name. Phenotypic stasis. The genes drift apart for millions of years while the outside appearance stays almost frozen. Evolution kept rebuilding the engine and never touched the paint. The researchers behind this work measured 361 physical specimens hunting for a reliable tell. Bill and wing and tail and leg and a faint difference in throat color. Even a statistical model trained on all of those measurements guessed the right species barely 8 times out of 10. What if the biggest hummingbird on Earth was mislabeled in museum drawers? Not once. In collections all over the world for more than 150 years. There was an old subspecies name sitting in the books. Peruviana. It was created long ago from a small set of original specimens, and everyone had been using it ever since. So the team sequenced those original birds. The set was a mix. 3 of them belonged to the northern species and 1 belonged to the southern one. The name had been describing 2 different animals at once from the very beginning. That earns a specific label, nomen dubium. A scientific name declared unusable because the specimens it was built on were never one thing. A century and a half of museum labels quietly wrong. Which clears the way for the part nobody expected. The northern bird had never been formally described at all. It was new to science while sitting in plain sight in drawers and on mountainsides across 4 countries. It was named Patagonia Chasqui after the Chasqui. Those were the relay runners of the Inca Empire, famous for carrying messages at speed across steep mountain ground. The same ground this bird works every day of its life, pollinating flowers across what was once that empire. And there is one more thing. On average, this new species runs slightly larger than its southern relative. which means the largest hummingbird in the world was only described for the first time in 2024. Now go back to the question from the beginning. The widest climate range in the entire hummingbird family never belonged to one bird. It was two ranges stacked on top of each other and mistaken for one. One species evolved in extreme vertical migration and learned to acclimatize in stages like a climber. The other stayed in the mountains all year, never left. Add their maps together and you get an impossible animal that was never actually there. The differences are real once you know where to look. The high mountain residents carry roughly a quarter more lung tissue than the migrants measured down at low elevation. And both still carry that high-altitude blood equipment, even the one that nests beside the sea. Worth being straight about how this line was drawn. These two were not separated because anyone can tell them apart. They were separated because their genes show they stopped breeding together an age ago. The people who study them full-time still get the identification wrong about 1 time in 5, which is the part that should stay with you. A bird twice the size of its relatives, and the record holder for its entire family. Watched by Darwin and stored in museums on 3 continents. And still nobody actually saw it for 200 years. So when you hear that some corner of nature is fully catalogued, ask what that really means. The giant hummingbird was never hiding. It was labeled, filed, and looked at directly for 2 centuries. Whatever else is standing in plain sight is probably being looked at right now, too. The full reference for this study is in the description if you want to read it yourself.